My name is Lana Sheffield, and for most of my life, my family treated my accomplishments like background noise. Not failures, just inconveniences. Things they tolerated the way you tolerate a buzzing light or a neighbor's barking dog. Always there. Never important enough to address. I learned early that excitement made them uncomfortable. Pride made them suspicious. And confidence, especially mine, made them cruel. So when the email arrived telling me I'd been selected for a national award, the kind that only a handful of people receive each year, I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't even smile right away. Instead, I stared at the screen and thought about my family. Because part of me already knew what would happen. Still, I decided to try one last time. I sent the invitation link to our family group chat. Nothing dramatic. Just the date, the city, and a simple line. It would mean a lot if you came. The typing bubbles appeared almost instantly. My sister replied first. Laughing emoji. Then another. Wait, you mean that stupid award thing? She followed it with, I already have concert tickets that night. Front row. Can't miss that for some fake title. My phone buzzed again before I could even process that. My mother chimed in. Well, you know how your sister is. And honestly, these things are usually exaggerated. Everyone gets awards these days. Then my father finished it. No emoji. No softening. Just words. Don't blame us if we don't go. I remember staring at that message longer than I should have. Not because it hurt, though it did, but because it confirmed something I'd spent years trying to disprove. I typed back 2 words. All right. Then I put my phone face down on the table and walked away. That decision, those 2 words, changed everything. Because what my family didn't know was that this award wasn't local. It wasn't symbolic. It wasn't one of those participation plaques they loved to accuse me of chasing. This ceremony was being broadcast live. National television. Massive venue. Thousands of people in attendance. And while my family screamed lyrics at a concert that night, something else was happening. Something they couldn't mute. Something they couldn't laugh at. Something they couldn't pretend wasn't real. The lights dimmed and the presenter stepped forward. My name appeared on screens taller than buildings. My face filled the massive display hanging above the crowd. The announcer spoke about my work, my impact, my journey. Things my family had never bothered to ask about. People around them knew who I was before they did. Strangers applauded. Cameras flashed. The room rose to its feet. And my family. They were still singing along, completely unaware that the daughter and sister they dismissed was being celebrated in front of the entire country. But that's not even the part that still makes my hands shake when I think about it. Because later that night, after the show ended, after the applause faded and the phones came out, someone said something to me that fractured everything I thought I knew about my place in that family. And after I walked out, nothing was ever the same again. Before I tell you what he said and what happened next, I want to ask you something. What time is it for you right now? Where are you listening from? I'm always curious how far these stories travel, how many invisible people recognize themselves in moments like this. Because if you've ever been the one who was overlooked, dismissed, or quietly doubted by the people who were supposed to believe in you first, then you already understand why this wasn't about revenge. It was about proof. And this was only the beginning. To understand why those 2 words, all right, carried so much weight. You have to understand the family I grew up in. From the outside, the Sheffield household looked normal. We lived in a quiet Las Vegas neighborhood where the lawns were trimmed, the mailboxes matched, and no one ever raised their voice loud enough for the neighbors to hear. The kind of place where people waved but never really talked. Where everything looked fine if you didn't look too closely. Inside, though, there was a system, an order. A hierarchy everyone understood without ever naming it out loud. I was the helper and my older sister, Blair Sheffield, was the star. From the moment she could perform, sing, dance, compete, everything rotated around her orbit. Her tournaments, her auditions, her practices. Our schedules bent to fit her calendar. Dinners were early or late depending on her needs. Conversations paused when she entered a room. Then there was Corey, the youngest. Baby. The comedian. He learned quickly that making people laugh earned him forgiveness before he ever needed it. Broken rules turned into funny stories. Missed responsibilities became jokes everyone repeated at holidays. And then there was me. Teachers loved me because they never had to worry about me. I turned things in on time. Followed instructions. I didn't cause trouble. Adults called me mature and so easy. I thought those were compliments. I didn't realize they were just another way of saying I didn't require attention. My mother, Donna, actually explained it once. Not cruelly. Not angrily. Just casually. She said every family needs balance. Star. Helper. And someone to keep things light. She said it like she was describing furniture. My father, Keith, worked long hours. When he came home, he was tired and distracted, but there was one thing that could snap him fully awake. Blair's stories. He'd nod through my sentences, eyes half on his phone, then suddenly lean forward and ask, "So how was practice today?" Directed at her. That pattern repeated everywhere. My school projects got pushed aside because Blair had a tournament that weekend. When I tried to explain something exciting from my day, Dad would smile politely and then pivot back to asking Blair about her coach. When Corey cracked a joke, the room lit up. When I spoke, people stood up to refill drinks or clear plates. None of it was dramatic enough to point at and call unfair. That was the hardest part. There was no single moment I could circle and say, this is where it broke. Instead, it was 1,000 small choices that taught me my news could wait. My needs were flexible. My excitement was optional, so I adapted. I stopped competing for attention because it never worked. I became useful instead. I learned how to fix things before anyone asked. I filled out forms, scheduled appointments, solved internet problems, handled logistics quietly in the background. The tragic irony was this. The more responsible I became, the less they seemed to look directly at me. They loved the results, not the person producing them. They saw a reliable function, not a daughter with her own life. High school, the roles were locked in. Blair always had an audience. Coaches, directors, neighbors who stopped my parents in the driveway to talk about her potential. Corey floated by on charm. Teachers laughed at his jokes. Adults called him a character. And me, there was a moment that still sits with me. We ran into neighbors at the grocery store. After the usual greetings, my parents launched straight into Blair's latest performance, Corey's sense of humor. I stood there holding a basket, smiling politely. No one mentioned me until the neighbor finally asked, "And how's Lana doing?" That was when my mother turned to me, surprised. As if remembering I was there, I learned to numb myself to it. I told myself I didn't need the spotlight. I found a field where the work mattered more than the applause, where results spoke quietly. And recognition wasn't the point. Years passed like that. Blair set the tone. Corey coasted. And I kept everything running. If you were the invisible child in your family, you know what that does to you. You grow capable. You grow resilient. And you grow very, very quiet about your own dreams. But quiet doesn't mean absent. It just means waiting. And eventually, something happens that makes waiting impossible. By the time that invitation arrived, I had already built most of my life in places no one ever thought to look. I was an emergency communication software designer. Not the kind of job that comes with applause or ribbon cuttings. I worked on routing systems for ambulance dispatch across Las Vegas. Software that helped determine which unit should go where, and how fast, when seconds mattered more than explanations. My days were spent inside data most people never want to think about. Traffic patterns at different hours. Hospital capacity in real time. Call histories layered over weather, construction, and distance. The goal wasn't elegance. It was speed. Because sometimes the difference between a scare and a tragedy was measured in seconds. When the system worked, nothing dramatic happened. Dispatchers got clean recommendations. Crews reached doors a little sooner. No one clapped. No one even knew my name. And that was fine. Invisible work had always been my specialty. The first person who really saw me was Dr. Selma Rodas. She was the director of the research group I worked under, and she noticed something no one else ever had. I volunteered for the ugliest datasets. The broken ones. The inconsistent logs everyone avoided because they took forever to clean. One afternoon she stopped by my desk and asked why I shrugged and said they bothered me until they made sense. Instead of telling me to move on, she smiled. She told me my attention to detail wasn't a flaw. It was a strength. Then she pulled up a chair and started asking what I thought about system architecture and failure modes. Real conversations, not polite ones. It was the first time someone treated my thinking like something worth exploring, not just something useful. That pilot project started small. One part of the city. Quiet test run, no one announced. After launch, response times improved. Calls bounced less. Dispatchers started sending notes saying the recommendations made them feel less helpless during peak hours. We expanded it zone by zone until the system covered the entire valley. Still, I stayed in the background. Months later, a regional coordinator compiled the data. Charts showing how many people reached care faster. How routing choices changed outcomes. He sent the packet to a national committee that tracked public safety innovations. I didn't know any of this was happening. One afternoon, Selma asked if I had time to talk. She closed the door and told me the committee wanted to speak with the designer behind the routing engine. I laughed. I told her it was just code. Just pattern recognition. She didn't let me minimize it. She reminded me of the overnight shifts. The stubborn bugs that refused to surface until 3 in the morning. The weekends I spent debugging instead of going out. She reminded me of the dispatcher who had called in tears because the system helped get an ambulance to a patient just in time. She told me recognition wasn't about ego. It was about refusing to walk away from problems other people stopped seeing. The review process took months. Questions came in plain language. They wanted anonymized call timelines. Explanations of human impact. I kept shipping updates while I waited, half expecting the whole thing to disappear quietly. Then the envelope arrived. Federal agency seal. Thick paper. Formal language. National Public Safety Innovation Award. The ceremony would be held in a downtown hotel ballroom. It would be recorded. Broadcast. There was a line near the bottom that stopped me cold. You may invite up to 4 family members or friends. I pictured my name on a placard. 4 empty chairs underneath it. I pictured my family somewhere on the strip, laughing, unaware that I told myself I could keep it private. I'd done that before. I was good at it. But something in me hesitated. I opened our family group chat. I typed a careful invitation. Read it twice. 3 times. Then, before I could shrink it into silence, I hit send. And waited. That was the moment everything started to tilt. The night of the ceremony, I stood alone in a hotel room that smelled faintly of steam and new fabric, watching a version of myself come together in the mirror. A stylist adjusted my hair. Someone smoothed the shoulders of a dark formal dress I would never have chosen for myself. I barely recognized the woman staring back. She looked steadier, older somehow. Like someone who belonged in the room she was about to enter downstairs. The hotel had been transformed into a controlled maze. Security badges, check-in tables, quiet voices directing people left or right. Categories printed on signs: public health, education, infrastructure, emergency response. I scanned the program until I found my name, tucked into the middle section. Not the opening. Not the finale. Exactly where my life had always been. Inside the ballroom, round tables were set with small white cards. The stage was low and simple, a podium centered beneath 3 massive overhead screens already glowing with soft light. I knew one of those screens would hold my face later. I also knew exactly who would not be sitting in the rows beneath it. Selma arrived beside me in a plain black suit, calm as ever. Team members filtered in, squeezing my hand, murmuring congratulations. There was a brief quiet before the room filled completely, a moment where the weight of it pressed in from every side. The program began, speeches about service, about sacrifice, about work that rarely makes headlines but holds entire systems together. I listened with half my attention, forcing myself not to picture my family arriving at the concert, finding their seats, laughing. They had made their choice. Tonight was not about the empty chairs. When my category approached, the lights dimmed. A video played. Dispatch centers, ambulance crews, satellite views of city grids glowing at night. A narrator explained the software in broad strokes, careful not to overwhelm. My name appeared once, briefly, almost easy to miss. Then the host spoke about shortened response times, about seconds mattering, about lives reached sooner. He said my full name. Applause rose as I stood. Walking to the podium felt like moving underwater. The sound blurred into a single rush. Stage lights erased the edges of the crowd. The glass plaque caught the light as it was handed to me. I shook an official's hand. A photographer captured a smile I hadn't planned. And in that moment, another scene played in my mind, a band finishing a song. Concourse buzzing. Screens cycling through beer commercials. Then cutting to a live news segment from downtown. My face appearing overhead. My name printed along the bottom. They hadn't asked. They hadn't come. But there it was anyway. I returned to my table as the program continued, heart still racing. Somewhere in my bag, my phone buzzed with a notification. Somewhere else in the city, another set of screens flickered, and my family finally saw the thing they had been too busy to attend. By the time the ballroom emptied, my phone felt heavier than the glass plaque in my hands. I retrieved it from the check-in desk, the screen already lighting up, vibrating non-stop. At first, I expected the usual flood, co-workers, city officials, screenshots from the operations channel where someone had already circled my name in red. Then I saw the missed calls. Dozens of them. All from the same 4 numbers. I opened the family thread, and the badge count jumped so fast it felt unreal. I didn't read right away. I scrolled to the top first, instinctively, like I was collecting evidence. There it was. My quiet invitation. A date. Time. The line that said it would mean a lot if they came. Under it, my sister's laughing reply. My parents backing her. My father's line, "Don't blame us if we don't go." And then further down, the tone changed completely. The timestamps told the story before the words did. The first burst of messages landed during the concert intermission. My mother's texts came in anxious blocks. She wrote about giant arena screens. About people turning to stare when my name appeared overhead. About someone behind her gasping and asking if she was related to that Lana Sheffield. My father's messages followed. Strangers had leaned over to ask if they were my parents. He wrote about pride, disbelief. How unreal it felt hearing my name in a place like that. Blair's texts were shorter. Clip. Full of exclamation marks. What? That was you. Why didn't you tell us it was this big? They described the noise when the clip played. Fans lifting phones to take pictures. The caption scrolling along the bottom of the feed, showing my job title. They asked questions. How long I'd been doing this, who I worked with, why no one had told them. No one mentioned the invitation. No one mentioned choosing the concert. They wrote about shock and pride as if the only thing that mattered was the moment of discovery, not the decision that led them there. The old reflex flared instantly. I could feel it in my hands, in the familiar urge to smooth things over. To explain the project. To downplay the award. To make them feel better about what they'd missed. My thumbs hovered above the keyboard, already forming reassurances I'd typed my entire life instead. I locked the screen and lowered the phone, back at the table. Selma noticed immediately. The way I was gripping the device. The look on my face. She lifted an eyebrow. Silent question hanging between us. I shook my head once. Not ready. She nodded and turned the conversation back to logistics, letting me disappear into practical tasks until the night wound down. When I finally reached my apartment, the city had gone quiet. I set the plaque on the counter and stood there for a long moment, just breathing. Then I opened my phone again. The unread badges had multiplied. Distant relatives. Old classmates. Neighbors. Links to news clips with captions about seeing my face on the strip. Mixed in were new messages from my family. Different now. Strategic. My mother asked if the local news wanted to talk about how she'd raised such a dedicated daughter. My father wondered if the city might be interested in a neighborhood angle. Blair floated the idea of a throwback photo, maybe a caption about always believing in me. I scrolled. And there it was. The receipt. Their new plan sitting directly above the lines where they'd brushed off my invitation. I saved screenshots to a private folder and put the phone down again. The gap between what they were saying now and what they had said before didn't feel like something a few late-night messages could close. And for the first time, I didn't feel responsible for trying. I woke the next morning to the sound of my phone vibrating against the nightstand. Familiar names. Numbers I hadn't seen in years. People suddenly remembering how to find me. I reached over, turned the screen face down, and went to the kitchen instead. I made coffee first. Let the apartment stay quiet. I needed to protect that stillness before letting anyone else into it. When I finally checked my phone, the world was already loud. 2 local stations wanted interviews. A regional outlet asked for office footage. Our department's communications team had sent a calm, practical note about managing requests. There was a line near the bottom that stopped me in a good way. You don't have to say yes to every camera. I sat with that. The family thread was still active. Plans layered on plans. Which relatives to call. Which neighbors to impress. Blair drafting public posts. Polishing nostalgia into something shareable. Corey reacting in bursts, not quite choosing a side. I opened a new message and typed slowly, reading each line before moving on. I acknowledged that it was a big moment. That it was strange seeing my face on screens around the city. Then I drew the line I should have drawn years ago. That I wrote that I wouldn't be doing interviews about my home life. No features about my childhood. Any stories would focus on the work and the people who depended on it. I asked them not to contact my coworkers. And if reporters approached them, I hoped they'd choose honesty over image. It hurt to watch them scramble for ways to benefit from something they had been so quick to dismiss. But I sent the message anyway. The pushback came fast. My mother wrote in tight blocks. She was just excited, proud in her own way. I was overthinking. My father was clipped. Don't tell us how to talk about our daughter. We sacrifice plenty. He didn't appreciate being cast as the villain. Blair was sharper still. Ungrateful, embarrassing them. Acting like she'd raised herself. Their words landed with less force than they might have even a year earlier. They sounded like echoes from a room I'd already stepped out of. I waited to see if I wanted to jump back into the familiar argument. What I felt instead was a tired kind of clarity, so I closed the chat without replying. I reopened the communications team email and read the media guide more carefully. Boundaries. Distance. A reminder that the people closest to us are sometimes the least prepared for public attention. It said it was okay to enforce space. Distance, I realized, wasn't a punishment. It was a set of coordinates I could choose for myself. I muted the family thread for a full year. Then I switched off individual conversation alerts one by one. In the weeks that followed, the award became shorthand at work. Dispatchers shared small details. The child who reached the hospital before a seizure spiraled. The elderly neighbor helped quickly on a bad night. Selma used the attention to secure more funding and staff. My personal life rearranged itself around quieter choices. I took the family thread off my home screen. Had dinner with coworkers who'd become friends. Met with students and talked honestly about burnout and purpose. Updates still slipped through. My parents framed a news clipping. My mother talked non-stop at gatherings. A cousin forwarded an email from my father about raising a daughter, who never needed much from us. I read it the way you read a weather report for a city you no longer plan to visit. Blair tried once more. She posted old photos, tagged my account, wrote sentimental captions about always believing in her little sister. I sent one direct message, clear and firm. Don't present our relationship that way. If it continued, I would block her everywhere and involve my legal team. She removed the tags. Kept posting without my name. That was what consequences looked like in my world. My parents could brag, but they couldn't reach me directly. Blair could perform nostalgia, but she couldn't rewrite what happened. Corey could sit on the fence, but the path back had been cut off. That I kept working on the routing system. Mentored interns. Joined a group reviewing near misses. I learned something important along the way. Success doesn't fix the past. Public recognition doesn't heal private neglect. It does neither. What changed was simpler and harder. I stopped treating my family's attention like a prize I had to keep earning. I built a life where the people closest to me knew what I did, cared why it mattered, and showed up long before there were cameras. If you need to hear this, hear it clearly. You are allowed to draw your own lines. You are allowed to decide which invitations matter. You are allowed to walk away from people who only remember your worth when someone else spells it out on a screen. Distance is not cruelty when it keeps you whole. Check in with yourself. Check in with the part of you that's still waiting for someone to show up. Especially when there are no lights and no applause.